AMD at this point needs to be rushed to the hospital to have an emergency extraction of its foot from its mouth. AMD's launch of the RX 7600 has been so disastrously messy behind the scenes that we're concerned with how hastily the whole thing has come together. The company changed embargo dates multiple times, panicked and reneged one of its two distinct embargoes, and asked for a do-over. It sent the wrong drivers to half of the press, including drivers with major bugs and performance problems that weren't final. It had partners distributing the wrong launch date, the wrong price, the wrong drivers, and it miscommunicated the OC SKU, review embargo, and launch dates. And now AMD has changed the MSRP pricing with just hours to go before launch. And after we completed our video, but just hours before launch of the video and of the RX 7600, all of this went down, and we had to stop and think about, why are they changing the price at this point? What signal does that send to the press and to consumers? The good news is that the price is lower, moving from $300 to $270. That much is positive. The bad news is that AMD can't be trusted to cohesively and competently launch a product. Normally, it embarrasses itself at time of launch, like with the 7900 XT at $900, and then it drops the price later. This time, it set a price, then decided to drop it a day before launch to preemptively embarrass itself, which doesn't really fix the problem because it sends a negative message about its own product. All of you in the audience commenting that this is AMD's game to lose were right, especially with the 4060 Ti being so embarrassing for NVIDIA. And the reason AMD made this change is because it suddenly and instantaneously lost confidence when NVIDIA blindsided them by surprise announcing not just the RTX 4060 with a closer date than expected, but also a lower price than expected at $300 for the 4060. And AMD responded to Telegamer's Nexus this, quote, "The reason we dropped the price is to deliver a more competitive solution for gamers. We reduced the suggested starting price of the Radeon RX 7600 8GB graphics card to $270. And this changes the conclusion today to a simpler one, which is wait until July and see what happens. Let the competition between these two play itself out. That's how this is supposed to work. That's why they're responding this way. But you don't get the benefit as a consumer unless you wait and see how it unfolds. And 1 month is not too long here, especially when GPUs aren't selling anyway. It's not like the old days where if you didn't buy it day one, you were screwed. But our problem with all of this is if AMD suddenly loses confidence like that before anyone even knows this thing officially exists, only through rumors, and if AMD can't properly communicate the launch dates, the multiple embargoes, its partners don't know what the hell's going on either. They gave us the wrong date at least twice. The partners were distributing the wrong drivers that were months old. The driver still had bugs. There was a press driver. That's the one we used, by the way. That's the proper driver. The whole thing's a mess. But we're going to get into the review. This was dropped in after the fact. We'll talk about that in a second. Before that, this video is brought to you by Fantex and the G300A Mesh Edition case. The Fantex G300A revives the A-series approach to airflow that Fantex began really pushing with the P400A that we liked previously. The new G300A comes in a few variants based on fan count and uses the Fantex ultra-fine front mesh that allows for a higher airflow without double stacking filters, as we've shown in the past. The G300A Eclipse is a compact tower supporting ATX boards, and you can learn more at the link in the description below. So here's some context. This review was done. We filmed it all, we completed it, and while we were in transit to an industry-wide event, Computex, AMD sent out the price change notifications. It's while we were flying out to Taiwan, which is where we are right now for a show, where most of the press will be. This is a very hastily made change, and the change was made about 1 day before the launch. So that means, at least for our team, we literally just got off of planes, 24 hours of flying, and had to come film this, because there's so little time between the change happening and the launch that is the only way we can socket this into the review and have it still make sense with the new pricing. Now, at the original price of $300, it wasn't particularly exciting. And the only thing really exciting about it was that $300 number. Just numerically, we haven't seen that with a new GPU in a long time at this point, other than Intel Arc. So that was the only thing it had going for it. $270 is the new price, and that, of course, is better for the consumer. We just wish AMD could get it together long enough to stop shooting itself in one foot with its CPU to motherboard partner communications, and then shooting itself in the other foot with its GPU to partner communications. This is like, it's what AMD always does. Okay, so real talk before we get into the review. The communication here from AMD has been dismal lately. It's bad with the CPUs, as we've seen, and it's bad with the GPUs. And this is incredibly abusive for how they treat their board partners, who they rely on to sell their parts, and how they treat the media reviewing the products. And it is therefore indirectly bad for consumers, because what it does is it puts us in media, all of us, not just GN, in a position where we cannot possibly perform our best work and do our best analysis and best job if the price is changing like that with no notice whatsoever in a way that influences the conclusions. So it forces us to come to a conclusion faster than we'd like to, and it means that we have these time constraints that are maybe intentional by AMD, because you can't perform your best analysis under such constraints. And the reason we're bringing all of this up today is because our only option is to shove this update in the front and then shove a conclusion at the back of the video. All the charts remain unedited, which means you're going to see references to price that are no longer accurate. However, all of the benchmark numbers are the same. So that is the excellent news here. Nothing else changes except for the price and the value, which we can handle pretty adeptly with just this intro and with the outro. It's just really frustrating for us because it forces a level of quality that we pushed pretty hard for the quality we get, and now we have to go back in and reduce it a little bit just to get AMD's price change in there. So that's all you need to know. We're gonna get into the charts now. It's unaffected other than the pricing. Anytime you hear price referenced, just keep in mind that all of those references were based on $300 originally. So, for example, the gap between a $300 7600 and a $400 4060 Ti originally, that would have been 33%, but now it is about 48%, 270 to 400. So keep that in mind. We're not going to go change any of those. It's just unreasonable at this point. And let's go through the numbers. The team has been pushing super hard for the past week. We have an entirely new test suite. All of this data is brand new. We have overhauled some of the games, did all the Asus and AMD melting stuff. We launched the failure tracker, and we're flying to Taiwan when this video goes up to cover a trade show. So, I'm kind of tired from the review cycle, but we're going to do this one more, and we're going to do it right. Let's get into the charts. We're not going to leave any numbers behind. In Total War Warhammer 3 at 1440p, the RX 7600 lands at 62 FPS average, beating the 6600 XT by 20%. Considering the 6600 XT launched at $380, and the 7600 is $80 cheaper by just launch MSRP, that's at least a better generational jump than we saw with the 4060 Ti review, where it was anywhere from -% or basically 0 to 19% better than its predecessor at the same price. These days, a 6600 XT is about $255 new. So the absolute value between the two here remains mostly scaled the same way. The 7600 outperforms the RTX 3060 by about 7%, which makes it the better choice there as well. The 4060 Ti that we just reviewed leapfrogs the 7600 by 31%, but it's also $100 more, and down at this price range, that's a huge swing. Intel's Arc A750 is around $250 today and $280 max, and that's outperforming the RX 7600 in average FPS and matching it in lows, making it a cheaper alternative with the same performance in this test. Arc has more room in its drivers than the others too, but it also has more variability and less consistency game to game. At 1080p, the 7600 has a large 39% advantage over the 6600 non-XT. The 6600 with XT isn't as far behind as it was at 1440p. The Intel Arc A750 puts up a strong fight here once again. It only gives up a 6% lead to the 7600 for $50 less money. And that's a good showing for Intel and makes it one of the better values on the chart. The 7600 is outperformed by the 6700 XT by 19% for 7% more money, assuming at least you can still get them for $320 when this video launches. The 4060 Ti is predictably faster, offering both 28% more performance and 100% more disappointment for only $100 more. It's a great bargain. Next is Rainbow Six Siege at 4K, which is considerably easier to run than other games in our suite. The 7600 is tied exactly with the A770 and is within 4 FPS of the 6700 XT, which is a good spot for the 7600. Value goes up with the much cheaper A750, with performance favoring the 7600 by 8% here. Looking back one generation, the 7600 runs 27% faster than the 6600 XT, and it outperforms the 6600 non-XT by a staggering 56%. The RTX 3060 is also lacking, giving up 16% to the 7600. And as for the 4060 Ti's lead, here it's 21% for 33% more money. 1440p is next. The biggest difference dropping to 1440p is the Arc cards sliding down the stack significantly. Where the 7600 was tied with the A770 at 4K, the 7600 now leads it by 21%. That's a massive swing. That says more about Intel's continuing battle with consistency more than necessarily the 7600's performance. The 7600's lead over the RX 6600 XT is now 20%, where previously it was 27%. Compared to the non-XT 6600, the lead falls from 56% previously to 49% now. As for the 6700 XT, that holds a 5% advantage. Not enough necessarily to justify the extra money in some cases, but it's still pretty close by. NVIDIA's closest competitor will eventually be the 4060, but for now, the 4060 Ti is in significantly different price class and leaves the 7600 to fight the remains of the 3060 Ti and 3060 card. Rainbow Six at 1080p is up now. The scaling has drastically changed since the 4K testing. With the 4060 Ti now, it's only 11% ahead of the RX 7600. It's not good for NVIDIA's argument given the price difference. Compared to the more direct price competition, the lead over the A750 is now about 59%, and the lead over AMD's own 6600 XT is 16%. Next up is Shadow of the Tomb Raider at 1440p. The RX 7600 lands at 99 FPS average on the chart, nearly tying with the 6600 XT. The gen-on-gen comparison most closely by name would be the 6600, and the lead here for the 7600 is 21%, with the MSRP to MSRP price drop being $30. It's $30 cheaper for the new 600 SKU, not counting modern prices, of course. The 7600 is firmly better value than the nearby Arc cards and runs 15% faster than the A770. As for NVIDIA, the 4060 Ti's 126 FPS average has it 26% ahead of the 7600 for 33% more money, with the 6700 XT also about 26% ahead, but as of writing this video, that one is only $20 to $50 more. So the developing story here is that AMD's biggest competition is possibly itself in this price class, followed by Intel. Switching to 1080p has the 7600 occupying the same rank as before, with a few GPUs switching positions. Arc is in a much worse position, with the 7600 beating the A770 now by 34%. The 6700 XT holds a 20% lead here, down from 26% at the higher resolution, with the 4060 Ti falling to 23% ahead. Performance versus the 3060 is still in favor of the 7600. We'll keep an eye on positioning between these as we move forward. Final Fantasy XIV has been somewhat of a weak spot for the Radeon cards in the past. The 7600 ran at 46 FPS average at 4K, and we'll get to the lower resolutions, but this is still interesting for the relative scaling. This has proportionally worse 1% lows than the adjacent RTX 3060 or Intel Arc cards. This is behavior that we tracked on the RX 6000 series previously in the same game. Looking at just the averages gives the 7600 a 25% lead over the previous gen 6600, but up the stack, the 6700 XT nets a massive 39% additional performance for only about $30 more. That's a big jump and worth considering over the 7600. The RTX 4060 Ti didn't particularly impress us here either, but check the NVIDIA review for why this happened the way it did. Final Fantasy at 1440p now. The 7600 is tied with the Arc A750 in average FPS, and in a vacuum of only this test, we definitely would recommend the A750 over the 7600 because it's $50 cheaper and it has better frame time consistency in this specific title. It's not always true though. The 4060 Ti here maintains the same level of technical value without succumbing to the frame time issues that AMD experiences, but it's $400 and it has lots of other problems. At 1080p, the ranking has shifted, with the RX 7600 now taking position higher than the A770. At 1440p, the A770 was 12% faster, but not here. This is, once again, indicative of Intel's early driver issues it's facing. Relative performance is better for the 7600 here in general, with an 18% lead over the RTX 3060, which is a slight improvement over the 13% gap at 1440p. That makes the 3060 look pretty bad here since it's more expensive than the 7600, and it is aging. But bear in mind that NVIDIA will have a new $300 4060 coming soon, and hopefully it won't disappoint us with that one. We don't know how it's going to perform yet. Horizon Zero Dawn at 1440p is next. The RX 7600 ran at 94 FPS average with a 10% lead over both the 3060 and the Arc A770. That's good, considering that both of these cards cost about $40 to $50 more. AMD's previous generation, 6700 XT, offers better value with a 21% performance advantage. That $20 extra then is a stretch that we'd call worth it here. And you get 12 gigabytes of memory instead of 8. That also leaves the 4060 Ti in an awful spot for value compared to either of the AMD options. At 1080p, the 7600 retains the same overall rank in the chart for Horizon, with better relative performance. The 4060 Ti's lead has slid down from 19% at 1440 to 14% at 1080p. Likewise, the 6700 XT fell from 21% faster than the 7600 to only 12%, and this shows that the RX 7600 scales more favorably at lower resolutions in this game. In other words, it's better at 1080p than it is at 1440p here. Intel Arc is performing a lot worse at this resolution though. The A770 gives up a massive 60% lead to the 7600, which was only 10% at 1440p. This is more of an Arc problem and possibly specifically a driver problem than it is an AMD benefit. The top of this chart is CPU bound, so you can ignore all of that data. Moving on to GTA 5 at 4K, tested at only this high resolution, mostly because of its age, we see the 7600 separate itself from the previous generation with a big 41% lead over the 6600. That's a phenomenal jump for RDNA 3 over RDNA 2. It's just a shame it's in a game that was originally released on the PlayStation 3. Even larger is the 7600's lead over the Arc A770, which gives us an example of Intel's ongoing struggle with older titles in particular. Conversely, the RTX 3060 holds its own much better, functionally tying with the RX 7600. This is the closest test between the two in our suite though. The 7600 is the better choice overall. The now old RTX 2060 is worth an honorable mention as well for its sheer staying power. The 7600 only runs about 18% faster than this 2019 GPU. And if you can find a good deal on a 2060 for less than $200 these days, it's still worth considering for modern low-end builds. Next up is F1 2022 at 1440p. The RX 7600 plots a few frames behind the 66XT at 106 FPS average, but it has better 1% lows. The 7600 is good against the closest Intel and NVIDIA competition as well, with a 17% lead over the 3060 and 19% over the A770. That would leave the 7600 in a favorable spot from a value standpoint if it weren't for AMD's biggest rival, which is itself. The 67XT is your best bet on value right now on a new card, while you can still get them for around $320 to $350 or so. XT walks all over everything in the $300 to $400 range. It's 34% faster than the 7600, and it even beats the new $400 4060 Ti by 9 FPS, which, while not a lot, is a lot when you consider the pricing. 1080p has the RX 7600 maintaining position relative to its contemporaries, with slightly worse performance as compared to the RX 6600. At 1440p, the 7600's lead was 17%, but here at 1080p, it's down to 13%. It's not as big of a swing as compared to the A770 though, which falls way behind. The 7600 is 37% faster than Intel's strongest GPU here, much wider than the 19% gaps we've seen previously. Cyberpunk at 1440p is up now. It's one of the most demanding games in our suite, even without RT. The 7600 managed to hit 56 FPS average, tying with the less expensive A750. It's a good result from Intel, and highlights Arc's potential in situations where the driver team has spent time packing in optimizations. Back to AMD, the 7600 holds strong at a 38% performance advantage over the 6600. So gen-on-gen performance is great here. Even the 6700 XT, which has been easily besting the 7600 in most tests, is only 9% faster. The far pricier 4060 Ti again fails miserably to separate itself enough from these less expensive GPUs to be even worth considering. At 1080p, the chart is mostly the same. The notable exception is the 7600 now running 8% faster than the A770. Compared to NVIDIA, the 7600 chalks up another 17% win against the $40 more expensive 3060, at least as of today. That's a little tighter than the 20% it held over the 3060 at 1440, but still good comparative value. The best value in the price range goes to the A750, which only gives up 10% to the 7600 despite being $50 cheaper. Let's move on to ray tracing benchmarks. We'll focus on 1080p for these because the added load from ray tracing and the mid to low end of GPUs means that it's going to be taxing for this. In Shadow of the Tomb Raider at 1080p with ray-traced tomb shadows, the RX 7600 reached 78 FPS average. It's a 29% increase over the 6600. That's larger than the 21% gap without RT, showing that RDNA 3 has advanced its RT hardware proportionally more than pure raster. On the other hand, the 7600's lead over Arc isn't as pronounced with RT on, at least in this one. The A750 allows a 23% win to the 7600, whereas the lead was much wider, at 38% without RT. The new RTX 4060 Ti shows off its one weird trick. Without RT, it ran 24% faster than the 7600. It now pulls ahead to 47% faster with RT. It's no secret that NVIDIA's RT is faster than AMD's, but it's interesting to see it manifest so plainly since the 4060 Ti is otherwise terrible. Next up is F122 with RT enabled at 1080p. The RX 7600 sits very close to both the A750 and the RTX 3060, meaning the A750 wins out among value between these three. The 7600 also widens its lead over the 6600 from 13% without RT to 29% with RT. The 4060 Ti flexes its one good thing again by running 49% faster than the RX 7600. We ran the RX 7600 through our control ray tracing test, but it failed to load full texture resolutions at 1080p and 1440p, which makes the data useless. This is a mix of VRAM and overall performance limitations. Our final performance benchmark is Cyberpunk with ray tracing at 1080p. We're using DLSS and FSR technology here, and Intel and AMD are on FSR, NVIDIA's on DLSS too. Scaling is in the chart header, and it's all like for like. With FSR and RT enabled, the RX 7600 ran at 57 FPS average for a 26% lead over the 6600. That's actually a relative regression as compared to the full raster benchmark, where the difference was 31% in the 7600's favor. This is also one area where NVIDIA just does better for the time being. The 3060 finally grabs a win over the 7600 by running 12 FPS faster on average. The 4060 Ti is also way ahead at almost 70% faster. And last, the A750 hangs in there by only allowing a 7% lead to the 7600, which again reflects well on the state of Intel's optimizations in Cyberpunk. Some quick thermal tests here on the reference design. In a sustained workload for 30 minutes, the card reached a steady state GPU core temperature of 75 degrees Celsius in a 21C environment. The hotspot temperature measured at 89 degrees, establishing a delta of 14 degrees. The best cards we've seen are still around a 10-degree delta, so 14 isn't far off from that. The hotspot is higher than we'd like to see, and there's plenty of room for board partners to improve on this design. Power consumption is last and quick. The 7600 pulled 165 watts in a GPU torture workload. That puts it 30 watts over the 6600 and about equal to the 4060 Ti. This is the primary area, other than RT, where AMD is weaker than NVIDIA. Efficiency. The amount of performance for the power drawn is not as favorable for the 76 here. But at these lower price tiers, efficiency matters a lot less to gamers than the value overall, especially when you're dealing with relatively low absolute power draw values as opposed to the higher values of, say, a 4090. So back to the future version of me here. Previously, it was a very clear, well, just why would you buy this? Get the 6700 XT. And now it's a little more fuzzy. But they are blasting the power to do so on the 7600, so the efficiency, the performance per watt, is not particularly strong with the 7600. It's kind of like that old AMD refresh approach where they blast the power and try and pull whatever out of the clocks they can to get some extra performance to buy them time until the next major launch. The reference card also runs kind of warm on the hotspot. It's not terrible for the GPU average, but hotspot at 90 means that we're really, once you factor in a higher ambient environment and you factor in a bad case, it's running too hot for what it is, but that's where partner models should step in. Now, AMD obviously was in no way ready to launch this product. It panicked, it pulled the trigger, it clearly didn't plan any of this, and everything they've communicated to us shows that this was not meant to launch today now. So for those of you at home who are considering a card, and for that reason, that's why our suggestion is that you wait, because it's 1 month, see how the 4060 plays out. Worst case, you waited a month and then you buy it anyway, or maybe the prices change even further still. Who knows, maybe the 4060 changes, Ti that is, if NVIDIA takes enough of a beating. Now, our issues with AMD's communication and extraneous problems don't affect the conclusion here today for value. You've got all the charts, you can make a decision on your own. We've given you our advice, which is to just wait and see, and we'll have more polished advice with the 4060, where hopefully it's more put together and we have some time to think about it. But what's clear to us is that AMD at this point needs to be rushed to the hospital to have an emergency extraction of its foot from its mouth because they were on Twitter just 2 months ago boasting of having more than 8 gigabytes of VRAM and knocking NVIDIA, and here they are with 8 gigabytes of VRAM, a 128-bit bus, and a card that, although it performs kind of okay, is now priced questionably because of its own action. Okay, so I don't know if we're gonna keep any of our original conclusion. If we do, it'll go after this, and it's gonna jump back to the studio. But my message to the audience is these are the lengths we are willing to go through to update the video and get it as accurate as possible when a company puts us in a position which is so untenable. Realistically, any normal company cannot update at this speed, and it's not easy to do, and we appreciate your patience where, as stated, you know, we're putting together high quality content, and when companies do this, although yes, the price change is a good thing, it's what it signals to us that's concerning. In other words, what did we overlook in this review process? And what we overlooked is AMD probably knows a lot more about the 4060 than we do. I'm sure there's some sort of information they have where they looked at it and they said, oh shit, we need to drop the price. And that's how we get here. But thanks for bearing with us on this one. Subscribe for more. We have a ton of cool stuff coming up for Computex. We are out here in Taipei for it. Really excited about the show, and we love covering it every time it's on. So check back for that. Go to store.gamersaccess.net to support us directly. Thank you for watching, and thank you for your patience with this one. We'll see you all next time.